Okay. Can I welcome everybody to the meeting of the Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel. Welcome to the meeting. Today we're going to be very much focused on the future of our two largest town centres in Kirklees, Huddersfield and Dewsbury. Thank you, Councillor Both. We may well come back to Murfield in due course, but today we're going to be very much focused on Huddersfield and Dewsbury. So to start off, for the benefit of the people who may be watching this remotely, if the panel members could introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself. First, I'm the chair of the panel, Councillor Rob Walker.
Andrew Bird, I'm a lay member co-opted.
My name's Harpreet, I'm a councillor in Ashbrow Ward.
Richard Murgatroyd, Councillor Golker Ward.
Judith Hughes, Councillor in Almonbury.
Martin Bolt, Murfield.
Bill Armour, Kirkburn.
And could I also welcome to the meeting three officers who are going to be involved in making the presentation and answering our questions this morning. So we've got Simon Taylor, Peter Thompson and Adele Poppleton. So welcome to the meeting. Thanks very much for coming along and the preparation that you've put in for the papers and things that we're going to be looking at today. Right. In terms of apologies, we've just had one apology from Mark Mercer, who is a co-optee member of the panel. Interests. Have any councillors got any interests to declare on the items that we're going to be looking at today? Okay, thank you. Admissions of the public. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, but it's there for public to attend and to watch remotely. Just a slight point about the minutes before we move on. You may wonder why the minutes are not on the agenda. At the last meeting, which was an extra meeting that we'd put together to look at the issue of fire safety following on from the Hackett report, which led on from the Grenville tragedy, and also looking at the public sector housing green paper, social housing green paper. At that meeting, there were the minutes of the last meeting, but there was only me present who'd actually been at the meeting before. So what's going to happen is that at the next meeting, there will be the minutes from this meeting and the previous two meetings, which we will have to look at and approve. So I hope that your memories are working particularly well when we come through to that meeting. Right, so without further ado then, we will move on to item 3, which is the future of the town centres in Kirklees. Simon is going to take us through some slides through a presentation. You've got hard copies of that on the tables in front of you. We're not going to run through the whole thing and then have questions. We're actually going to take it in sections. So we're going to look at the broad overview, the national picture, and the work that previously has been undertaken by Scrutiny around this issue of town centres. Then we will look at what's been happening, what is going to plan to happen in Huddersfield. We'll have questions. The same thing for Dewsbury. And then the final session, we'll be looking at what we're going to do going forward and our general questions about the strategy which is being adopted by the council. Right, so over to you, Simon.
Thank you for that, Chair. Just to sort of, I don't know everybody on the panel, but most people do know me. Simon Taylor, I'm Head of Planning, another function transportation and one or two regeneration areas as well. So I've sort of picked up on town centre initiatives fairly recently. And my colleagues here, Peter Thompson is involved in Dewsbury Town Centre at the moment, and Adele is involved from a culture and vibrancy side. So we're hopefully here to be able to answer some of your questions. It's very good that Councillor Walker is trying to break this session up, because I was a bit conscious there's a lot of slides here. What you don't want is me talking at you. I quite like the idea of discussion. And just to reiterate what Councillor Walker was saying earlier. I've tried to divvy it up into three distinct areas, really. This sort of overview of the health of the town centre, current projects in the two main centres, and then this discussion part covering quality, the offer, and perceptions. And I think the perception side of things is particularly pertinent at the moment, because we've had a number of reports come out very recently, or one in particular from the public health sector, about the health of Huddersfield Town Centre and where it sits in relation to centres across the UK. And it's not in a place that we would necessarily want it to be in the future. So that's what we're going to be doing today. You've had a paper. The paper is quite long. It's quite detailed about the health of our town centres, what's happening generally, the general trends. This slide, really, all it does is trying to summarise that as quickly as possible, because I'm pretty sure that you've read the paper and you're au fait with the contents there. I think the key things here are about the oversupply of shops and the fact that that oversupply is likely to increase again, which is not a good sign for the future of our town centres. And if you hark back to the very recent Health on the High Street report that came out last week, that has a very negative score in terms of assessment for an individual high street. And what that means is that vacant units are growing across the country. We're not unique in Huddersfield or Dewsbury or any of our smaller centres to have vacant units. We've got about 14,000 units that have been vacant for a long period of time as well, which is up to 3 years. Another sign that town centres, from a retailing perspective, are generally on the decline. Of course, there'll always be a comment that comes back to the impact of online sales and how that's impacting on our town centres. We know that online sales are now at about 18% of all retail activity, and it's set to grow to 30% by 2030. So if 18% is having an impact now, imagine what a 30% impact will have in that time frame. We need to be very mindful of that. Allied to that, footfalls across the town centres are generally falling, and they have decreased every year since 2013, and over a 10-year period that's fallen by 17%. Kirklees towns are no different to that particular picture. Okay. I would, however, point out, though, whilst that bullet point there says that Kirklees towns generally mirror this picture, Dewsbury has a slightly worse picture to it, and we've seen a 32% decline in footfall, bar a couple of blips around 2012 since 2008. So we have particular marked problems in Dewsbury, and I'm pretty sure that that doesn't surprise you from the information you've been fed in the past. So a lot of that comes from the Grimesy report, which was finished this year. I just want to pick up on the Grimesy review. Interesting document. You can tell that town centres are becoming a focal point for government policy and government activity. 4 themes: making the transition, fairer, more economically sustainable high streets, community first, and better managed high streets going forward, and a vast number of recommendations from the review. I've picked out a few here, and I think the important ones, just to sort of not dwell on this slide too much, is the one under making the transition. Is we do have to accept you're never going to get back to that high street where it's primarily for shopping. Retail levels will fall, and we need to diversify away from retailing as much as we possibly can. And that's a level of acceptance that we have to take on board when we're making our plans for the future. The fairer, more economically sustainable high street, The key bullet point there I've highlighted is business rates. What role do business rates play in making sure some of these new uses start in the first place and can sustain themselves over a long period? Community first is really important. My view is town centres tend to polarise. You've got a drinking culture, maybe, a shopping culture that is declining. It needs to be more inclusive if it's going to survive. And that means, how do families come into the town centre? Can families come into the town centre at 10 o'clock at night, as you might find on the continent? And then the last point there is about better managed high streets. A business approach is being recommended, and I think that would be a sensible move forward. The last slide in this section, first section, yeah. Write it down. So the last slide in this particular section is just a reminder that Scrutiny panel in 2015 did a collection of evidence around 10 town centres and came up with 6 recommendations, some of which the council are active with, some of which are not so active with. And I'm just putting that slide in there to remind you what they were. And I think the important ones at the moment are about vision, about having a proper action plan for the town, and about working towards building capacity within the business community in each of those town centres. I think there are 2 or 3 elements that we are progressing at the moment. But I think you can see here that it's been an issue for a while, and it will continue to be an issue locally and nationally as well. Okay.
Right, thanks, Simon. So with the first set of questions and our discussion, if we can try and focus on the bigger picture rather than specific questions about Huddersfield or Dewsbury, that would be useful. I guess you might need to use perhaps examples linking to those, but if we can try and keep things fairly general. So we start off, Martin, first off the blocks, and then Bill. Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Looking at the presentation and the paper, as you rightly said there, the bigger picture. So where on page 1 are the strategic objectives, the aims and the agreements? What have Cabinet set out as their objectives? Because within these, we can see that there's a master plan, emerging projects and all that. But in order to evaluate it, we want to check back at what the objectives and outcomes that were agreed at the start were. Without that, how do we know if the millions of pounds that are going to be spent in town centres are actually achieving anything? So what are the strategic aims, objectives and outcomes that have been agreed by Cabinet, please?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So it's knowing at what point those are going to be established and going to be clear and go out to consultation. So if you could tell us something about how that's going to happen as part of the planning process. Okay.
So I'll just pick on Dewsbury, I think, for a moment. We've got, in Dewsbury, we've been working for a number of years on a strategic development framework, and that has morphed itself into a master plan more recently and a refresh of that strategic development framework. Within that, we have set out some initiatives and objectives which we are working towards, and they are about, if I just refresh my memory of the 3, my hard copy of the presentation. Yeah, it's about increasing activity in the town, and I'll come on to this at the latter part of the presentation. It's about increasing activity, it's about increasing the attractiveness of the town, and it's about improving accessibility. And they're the 3 sort of strands that we're trying to build action plans around and deliver on those initiatives. Seem quite straightforward to us. So activity, so that's bringing uses into the town that will create vibrancy and footfall. Attractiveness, which is about better spaces and better places, quality, and then improving accessibility. How do you actually move around the town? How do you get into the town? And those sorts of issues. And we'll build our action plan around those. If I move on to Huddersfield, the picture...
So those are the aims. Sorry. Those are the aims, which again should be at the top. Yeah, usually you get a bullet point statement. The Cabinet would like to see our towns more attractive, accessible, etc. And this will be achieved with these outcomes. If we're talking about delivering stuff after, you haven't got measurable outcomes. How can we scrutinise this process going forward if there aren't, again, what's the thing, smart, simple, measurable, where are they so that we can come back or the public can come back? Because with respect, we've had Dewsbury Town Centre managers, City Challenge, we've had this, we've been putting money at things over the last 20-odd years that I can remember. And still, the same towns are having to have more money put. It's time that we got around to, when we're doing something, putting something down and saying, right, this is what we want to achieve, so that we as a scrutiny panel, the public, the business community, know where we're going and can measure it. If it's just, we'll do a project, we'll do this, we'll do that, with respect, we're not going to know if it... we start off with baselines and everything, so I'd like to see some smart objectives.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, because I think it is important that those things are shared with elected members, and also it's the partners within the communities. I think that's a theme that runs right through these reports, the importance of partnership. It's something that we picked on when we've been looking at economic strategy. I think that is a very valid point, that it needs to be very upfront, very clear what we're actually setting out to achieve, what our objectives are. Can I just bring Adele in first? Bill was going, so we've got Bill. Right. Could I if I let Adele come in first, then I'll come back to you, Richard, if it's really linking into that. Yeah.
I think actually you're making a very fair point, Councillor Bolt, but I need to refer you through to the Kirklees economic strategy, and within that it does refer to town centres. Now we're going through a process at the moment of refreshing that strategy, and I think Simon and I need to take back the very points that you make, Councillor Bolt, and actually say we need to be very clear within that strategy. What are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for town centres? Why is that? And how does that relate to the overall economic strategy for the district?
Yeah, so I think that's something we certainly need to capture in the recommendations from the meeting.
Just building on what is Martin, isn't it? Yeah, what Martin was saying. I think that's absolutely spot on, and we do need measurable outcomes. In terms of accountability, I think accountability, it isn't just for bodies like this. Actually, we need to be outward looking and think about we're accountable to our communities, to the business sector. So I suppose maybe one thing, if we are talking about setting targets and aims, that, and I'm sure it'll be coming up probably several times in this meeting, but it's about consultation as well, because, it should be a two-way street where different stakeholders within the community can actually say what they think the aims and the targets should be as well, and so they can feed in, So presumably we'll be discussing some of those processes later, but clearly that's part of it as well. So.
Yes, a couple of points, I think. The first one is, it does seem to me we're looking at something of a rebalancing of town centre functions, or what town centres are for. And in fact, we're potentially going back several hundred years to where town centres were centres of population, not just commerce or trade. The first thing, and it links with that potential change, it also links with vacancies, is we're moving towards a financial model where this council will be getting the business rate or non-domestic rates income and losing government grants, central government grants to balance. Now, I'm just wondering what the economic implications for the council are of these changes. Are we going to be worse off financially? That's my first point. Do you want to pause there?
Yeah, that's quite a big issue really in terms of council finance.
Can I just add to that the council's future is not just the business rates, but it's also council tax, and actually by bringing more residential into the town centre and looking not just at retail business, but looking at other businesses too, then we are going to be taking that income in.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, actually building on that and really looking at Huddersfield more sharply, we're moving towards much more of a student economy. We're looking for student accommodation in and near the town centre. Most students don't pay council tax. So we are perhaps looking at a deficit in funding there, in income there, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond to that.
We're also very aware that we could be getting to a point where there's a saturation of the student market. So in part of the discussions that we're having around town centre residents, it's about attracting other residents into the town centre. Because again, what you don't want to do is create ghettos. You don't want just a student ghetto or just another type of ghetto. You actually want a mixed population. That's how we increase vibrancy. That's how we ensure safety within the town centre as well, is having that diverse population mix.
And just building on that, and I think the final point really, is that we do need a broad integrated policy, which we are trying to bring in, I'm sure. But looking at Huddersfield Dewsbury town centres, an obvious target to my mind is young professionals. Get some decent accommodation, town centres, and we've got the transport links to Huddersfield, to Manchester, Leeds, and indeed Wakefield. How can we integrate the transport and the accommodation plans?
The issue of young professionals is we've been running some stakeholder workshops as part of the Huddersfield Town Centre Master Plan exercise, and it's effectively a sort of evidence and sort of opinion gathering set of sessions. That issue of young professionals has been tabled a number of times. I think there's a little bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation around that issue. Is, yes, you're right, we want young professionals to live in the town, and actually the transport offer from Huddersfield Station to centres like Leeds and Manchester is fantastic. Probably second to none in terms of that sort of second tier set of towns in West Yorkshire. But there is this growing concern that unless you have the offer in the town, are the facilities right, you can't kickstart that market particularly well. And I know that we're concerned that maybe we're not retaining some of the young graduates from the university. They're actually living and working studying here, and moving to Leeds or Manchester to work or live. So we are very alive to that. I think we do have the basis for attracting that, but it needs to be enhanced by a good cultural, good nighttime economy offer, and actually finding the right types of sites to provide that accommodation. Now, Council already going through an exercise of marketing some of its own properties, and I'm pretty sure that we're not going to be concentrating on student accommodation, because we are pretty alive to the fact that we don't want to fill the town full of students. They are one part of that equation. So the council has a little bit of control in its own land and its own assets in controlling where some of that first stage young professional accommodation might be. But you're absolutely right. It has to be an essential part of it. And I think we've also talked about the role of senior living in the town centre as well, whether there's any possibility for that. But that, again, has similar issues. Do you have the right offer? Do you have for that sector of community as well? So it's a big package, and I think it's difficult to know where to start, really.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation so far. It's been really useful. You know, this is a national issue. I do agree. You know, town centres across the country are struggling. And, you know, if we look at the old retail model, that isn't working these days. We know how we shop has changed vastly. And we're trying to fit that around our busy lives, or so-called busy lives. I think everyone likes to say they're busy these days, don't they? So, you know, it is a national issue that we need to recognise that. Obviously, there has been an issue with, I think, how residents perceive the town centre. So there is, you know, some work that we do need to do in that. So, you know, even if I'm just asking people about their perceptions of the town centre, part of that might be because actually we expect more from a town centre as well. And perhaps, you know, for some local residents, it isn't quite meeting the demands that they might have these days, and those demands have changed. It was interesting that you mentioned the Health on the High Street report. I picked that up last week. And obviously there's quite a big link with deprivation, isn't there? So if you look at the top 10 unhealthiest high streets compared with the top 10 healthiest high streets, you see there is, you know, some sort of link there between how well-to-do that area is and how not well-to-do the area is. I know a couple of sessions ago, we went through the economic strategy, didn't we, at this meeting? And I think Martin did make a fair point about the objectives. And in there is a section on town centres, and there are some smart objectives in there, but perhaps we just need to look at some of the wording around that, and I hope that would come back to us as well, so we can look at that. But one of the points I made then was, I'm very keen at how we look at inequality. So here's another example of how inequality is impacting actually the vibrancy of our town centre. So how do we make sure that that is a key part of what we're looking at in the town centre? And then just additionally, I think it's also just about that stakeholder. We were all talking about it, and I'm sure there's a lot of stakeholder engagement going on. I guess I'd just like to know a little bit more about it, and perhaps when I'm going to my coffee shops in town, they're not necessarily aware of it. So how do we make sure they feel like they're involved in you know, any changes that we want to make to the town? Because they'll have different perspectives and views, won't they, that we'll want to take into account.
Can I just pick up that engagement point at the end? You're right, there is some engagement going on in Huddersfield, but it has to be quite tailored because we're on quite a fast trajectory. So we're picking out businesses in particular, some sort of groups like the Civic Society have got a vested interest in the town centre. I think the Civic Society have also run their own sessions on town centres as well. So managed to get them along. University, clearly. One or two other sort of small business groups, Huddersfield Voice, have put input into it as well. But I'm pretty much aware that that's not the whole picture. But what we will be doing, this is a first step on the way to having an action plan for the town. What we will be doing in the year after is developing an area action plan through the local plan process, which will be more focused on engagement and in a lot more detail. So we'll be able to bring in more groups like that. I'm pretty keen to see whether or not we can actually fit some of the bespoke sessions in for individual groups around the master plan as well. One area I'm quite keen to do is I want to get hold of a group of young people and find out exactly what they want to see, because actually it's fine for us to sort of dictate the future of the town, but there's not many of us under 40 in this room, so I'd like to target that group, apart from you, Martin, of course. But so you're right. Engagement is really, really important, and we need to be really careful about who we talk to, how we interpret all of that. The other thing I would say is in Dewsbury we had a very long and very in-depth engagement process that ran over a long period of time. And we tried to refresh that process, and I think we came under quite a bit of criticism for, oh, not this again. So we need to strike a balance between doing enough to test the water, but not overdoing it a little bit. But the Dewsbury stuff was very well researched, and the engagement process was really quite thorough, and we're still using that to this day. So it's really important. There was another point that you raised as well, wasn't there? Sorry, so
it's working now. It was around the inequality aspect. So, you know, the deprivation was definitely linked to that. You know, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think you're right on that point. And I think that this Health on the High Street report is really, really helpful, actually, and how certain activities we might need to see whether we can control them better. I'll just pick out one example. We are thinking about what our next steps are through the local plan process. What policies do we need to develop? And one of the key ones is, do we want to develop a policy around hot food takeaways? And whether or not that would have a marked impact on inequality, and it's sort of that linked to health as well. So we are thinking about those sorts of issues. And I think, to be honest with you, our public health colleagues are very, very keen on us progressing that type of policy. So,
I mean, I think we're looking at the national picture now. So, I mean, I think the kind of big trends that you've identified and that the Grimsey review has identified, you know, it's very hard to see how they will reverse in the near future. So we've got to kind of, you know, cut with the grain. And, I just wanted to raise a few issues around that. The first one was about use of buildings, because, I mean, certainly I don't know if there's any other history teachers in the room, but me and Rob have that dubious pleasure. And if you look at towns now, they're actually quite unusual, because normally, you know, for most of human history, there's always been retail, but it's been linked to people making stuff or having offices. So in other words, what you had a mix of almost kind of, you know, workshop-y, office-y type accommodation that was in the town itself, which may have had a retail side to it, but or may not. So, you know, I just wondered, and I appreciate the council doesn't own that much of the property in the town centre, but, you know, I wondered if there was any scope for actually incentivising and encouraging people to come and work. You know, small scale, self-employed enterprises actually coming and getting a base, so, you know, within the town. So that's one thought. The other thing, if we're looking at the big picture, is about really, I wonder if, not just in terms of targets and objectives, but also branding of a town, our local towns, would be to kind of tie in with big issues, global issues even. I mean, we all know that, you know, the UN has said we've got 12 years to actually turn around the situation if we're going to prevent runaway climate change. And, you know, so we could actually build into our policy, perhaps, issues around sustainability. You know, why not brand Kirklees as a plastic-free authority and have that as a major aim of you know, that's the kind, so, I don't know, that's the kind of thinking that might actually set us apart and actually get people to come into the towns a bit more. So, yeah, just a few thoughts.
okay, I'll just pick up on that live and work issue in the town. You're absolutely right. I think it's if you go to sort of places, some centres in London, you'll probably find some of those small businesses manufacturing at the back and selling out the front. You're absolutely right. And I think we're pretty much open to that. But it does rely on there being business out there that want to operate in that way. But I suppose the council can make that option more favourable by incentivising those types of activities. One thing that we are thinking about at the moment is how do we use some of our capital investment to encourage some of the buildings on, and we've got a lot of buildings in the town that are, they're not cheap to convert. We've got a lot of listed buildings in and around the town that need to be done sensitively. Now, how do we incentivise some of the owners of that, or some of the lessees of those buildings, to do the types of activity that you're suggesting? And one suggestion that we are is that we set up a fund which actually targets the refit of certain businesses, and actually what we're thinking about might align it to some of the sort of more favourable uses set out in here, but it could be businesses, it could be all sorts of activities. So I don't think that that will happen without some sort of incentives, but it's certainly on our sort of pathway of thinking at the moment. And then the other point you were raising was around climate change. It's interesting because it's come up in some of the workshops, not in the plastic-free town, but free parking for electric vehicles and having a dedicated car park. So I think what you're seeing is a sea change in our attitude from certain sectors that actually demand that, for want of a better phrase, greener lifestyle. And certainly we need to think about how people are going to walk and cycle through the town in a much more comprehensive way than we have done it in the past. So I think you're absolutely right. Those sorts of initiatives would make the town very attractive. I quite like the electric charging point car park, but it's not for me to decide. But I thought it was an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think there's the broader point there about the distinctiveness of Huddersfield and Dewsbury and our other towns, about having a vision for them. Perhaps that's something we will come back to. Yes, Andrew.
Thank you. Sort of building on that point a little bit, I think, and why places like, sort of examples to talk about the Northern Quarter in Manchester, for instance, or Hebden Bridge, or places which have seemed to have bucked the trend. It seems to me when you go around, it's quite a complicated web of interactions and impacts, and are we working at the right level with this feels a bit, again, back to my sort of theme from other meetings, a bit too top down, a bit too deterministic in a way. These things are quite organic, quite difficult to predict what will work in a particular locality. I'm very interested that Doncaster seems to be picking up the idea that their revitalisation of that sense is going to be driven around a sort of a maker, artisan model, building on what they're saying and what we've seen in places like Hebden Bridge. The scale of that is so different. I'm quite surprised that anybody thinks that's going to apply. But that seems to be what they've caught on to. One of the dangers of all this is people go sort of catching on to the last thing that worked, and it's going to be different for us because all these things are quite unique. I'm fascinated by the Northern Quarter in Manchester. It's a very sort of rough and ready, quite derelict set of buildings, quite rough buildings, but very vibrant, very lively, very buzzy, long times of the day, quite edgy because you go a few yards away from it and it's quite nasty, quite rough. But actually inside, there's people doing business, digital activity, lots of coffee shops, lots of restaurants, lots of nighttime economy. Now I know it's Manchester, but it's a really interesting little example, which will not, we won't be able to pick that up and move it here. It'll be something else here. And it's just trying to get our heads around thinking about that sort of complexity and sort of in at the bottom. So I think building on your point about entrepreneurs wanting facilities, are we doing everything we can to make pop-up shops possible, those sorts of things, pop-up venues possible, so that if people have got an idea to run a restaurant in the early evening, what are we doing about the 25,000 people who come through the station, commuting back in the evening, having left to go to work? How are we going to keep them in the town centre between 6 and 8 or for longer? Those sorts of questions don't seem to be sort of being tackled in this. It's still very programmatic, if you like. Sorry, I'll stop. I
don't mind responding to that. I think you're quite right that where we're now seeing in the country successful, vibrant town centres, it has been that organic growth. And I think that's what we need to really dissect is how does that happen and what is the role of the council within that? Now, at times, we are too prescriptive. We want the outcomes, we want the strategy, we want to dictate how it's going to be. And actually, a role of a council should be to be an enabler. And sometimes that's stepping back, it's reducing the red tape, it's not criticising people when they have a go, and it's accepting them that entrepreneurial spirit is needed, whereby some things will fail, and it's okay to fail, but we have to look at research, testing, just let something have a go. Now, we're taking that approach at the moment at Queensgate Market, and the whole temporary contemporary initiative with the university, with the traders as well, and now starting to involve local artists, is all about, let's just see what works. You know, and if some things fail, that's fine, but this is a research project. And what you're beginning to see are things organically growing, and some people being attracted into that now, wanting to be part of that. And all we do is say, okay, there's your space, make it happen.
Yeah, I've got one observation on this is, and Councillor Walker and I were talking just before the meeting about how some of our small local centres have done quite well. And a lot of that is about community ownership. Centres like Slowett have done reasonably well over the last few years, and that is largely because that community knows what it wants to offer and has been very active in shaping their local centre. And, I live in Honley, and I think that my sort of high street is pretty good. I don't really need to go very far for stuff, and quite happy about that. And there's places like Lindley are probably a lot sort of quite upmarket, really. The offer there is, and it does come down to who owns the town, and do we want it to be community led, which I think is probably more preferable. Your point about it needs to be more bottom up. At the moment, the council is in this position where he's been asked to sort of tackle some of these issues, and it does feel like if we're not careful, the council will impose some sort of ideas on that town centre community. And we need to avoid that as much as we can. But it's good to hear from Adele that we do know how to let go at times, and we do need to facilitate the opportunity.
The other thing we need are the entrepreneurs out there. So if you look at successful places again, you look at Halifax and Dean Clough area, that was down to Sir Ernest Hall. You look at Saltaire, in Salts Mill and the work that Jonathan Silver did there. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how do we attract those types of people that want to give it a go, want to invest. That's the thing, that they brought money with them, that they want to invest in an area. And that at the moment I think is just a conundrum that we're facing that we don't quite know how to answer at the moment.
Yeah, I think attracting inward investment is a very big issue, and it's central to the whole economic strategy, isn't it? So that may well be something that we need to pursue further. Right, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. One of the 3 areas that we heard about earlier was accessibility. And we've got 2 slides, similar things. One's transportation projects and one's major investment opportunities for the different towns. And I think we need to be looking at accessibility, in particular if we focus on Huddersfield first. We should be looking at the challenges and opportunities for Huddersfield. Accessibility, there's a list of the major things, A62, Smart Corridor, etc. You and I were at the Wicker consultation meeting recently. One of the main problems of Huddersfield is the lack of accessibility when there's a match at the stadium by public transport, resulting in congestion, poor air quality and everything else that we're supposed to be resolving. So let's look at in developing the town centre, because otherwise people are not going to be coming into Huddersfield on a match day to shop if they're going to have to spend ages queuing. And the ridiculous situation at a recent home game was I brought my son for the Liverpool match. So we got on a bus at Murfield. It cost him £5 for a return ticket, for which he only used one segment. Because when we came out of the match, the traffic was at a standstill on the A62. And we'd walked from the stadium back to Murfield before we saw a bus. The majority of those cars, as you get a chance to look at them when you're walking past them, are low occupancy, single or low occupancy. The council, as a partner in the stadium and a key player in Wicker, ought to be working to speak to the football club, stadium users. Right, where are your season tickets? Let's do a travel plan and then speak to the public transport operators. How do we get these people out of these cars? Because for a stadium with 24,000 capacity and only 2,000 car parking spaces, it's not sustainable. That's why for Townsend, the challenges, where on here we're looking at the challenges of what HD1 might do for Huddersfield Town, the town centre. If HD1 starts pulling people away from the town centre, how does that square with sustainability? And looking at your transportation project on page 11 for the Dewsbury, it's highlighting things which are, some of them, like Murfield, Dewsbury, Leeds, are in early stage feasibility. But I make no apology for raising the error and mission, the transport project and opportunity. Because I'll say again, it's the only railway station in Kirklees that's got a link to London, and you keep missing it.
Right, well done, Martin. I was sure you'd managed to shoehorn Murfield in there somewhere, so well done. Yeah, I think there's the big issue about transport, and I think as members of this panel, I think one thing we're very aware of is the interaction between different strategies, between transport, what's happening in town centres, the economic strategy and so on. But I think you are correct. Generally, we do need to look at accessibility in terms of transport, whether people are using private vehicles or whether people are hopefully using more public transport. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I suppose the only thing, I do want to say a couple of things.
We will let, if it's quick, Judith, before, yeah.
Over the years since I've been a councillor, we've sat and talked about this in Scrutiny for many years. One of the things we have spoke about before, and it goes back to uniqueness, is about the canal. Because that canal connects the whole of Kirklees as well. And talking about transport, what you're talking about, have we ever looked into the likelihood of water buses rather than having to use the A62, that people could be coming down onto the canal? And we are unique compared to a lot of places around, actually having that canal on the edge of our town centres. And I remember years and years ago when I was a child and there were a plan in the Examiner about Kingsgate. There were many plans, weren't there, before Kingsgate came. But there was one linking it to the university and to the canal, and that you could have trips from, the university and through Kingsgate. You were going to go through Kingsgate, the actual shopping centre. And that was fabulous when we saw it, but of course it never happened. But we just keep doing these things. We're going to do this, and then we don't do it.
An interesting extra dimension.
I probably just need to put to bed for Martin's benefit. That was my fault that Murfield got missed off. I spotted it this morning and I was dreading you raising it. So I do apologise, but you're absolutely right. Ravensthorpe and Murfield are the centres of real opportunity as part of Transport. Sorry. Murfield has lots of opportunities. You're absolutely right. And that London stopper is something that we need to make sure that he's retained. So I apologise for that. I haven't heard about the water bus ideas. I have to say I do remember a cable car issue a number of years ago, and obviously that's not materialised. But you're absolutely right. Getting people into town in a different way to their car is going to be vitally important. We can't continue in that way. We are making early strides in developing a better cycling link into the town, particularly from the Colne Valley end, across, particularly we've just finished, the Canals and Rivers Trust have just finished the first section of that from Milnes Bridge into town. That goes in front of the college, and then you can link into the town centre. I will come in onto a couple of projects later on that are designed to get you across the town in a more sort of efficient way. That's across Church Street and the Queensgate proposals. But the A62 Smart Corridor is the start of getting people in from that other direction to the town centre, because that links up with the canal towpath as well. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Hughes, the canal towpath is a fantastic opportunity, and it actually links back into to Murfield as well, via various... Yeah. So it is something that needs to be developed more.
Could I ask a couple of questions? The first one is, I think it's already come up in your comments, Simon, about getting a broader cross-section of people into town centres in the evening. And I just wondered what measures are envisaged and what work is taking place when we're looking at the nighttime economy to work with the police and other partners as well to make the environment in town centres more attractive and safer for people who want to come in with families.
Okay. About 6 months ago, a new kind of group was set up, which is the Safer Huddersfield Nighttime Economy Group, which is now expanded to daytime economy as well. And this was because of a number of issues that were being reported in the press and were really affecting people's perceptions of the town centre and feeling it was no longer a safe place to come in. So thinking about it, it's not 6 months ago, it's a year ago, because the first initiative was looking at last Christmas and how the different agencies worked together to increase safety in the town centre. And it is a partnership, because it's no one agency's responsibility. It's about the police, it's about the businesses and the offer that's there. It's also about the voluntary sector. And so at the moment we're in discussions around street angels coming in and working with the town halls and LBT over the Christmas period, so that people, particular people on their own returning to public transport or to their own cars, feel safe because they're being escorted. So we're just trying different things. The diversity of the nighttime offer has been identified as being quite crucial to the future, and so we're now beginning to look at what we need to be doing that. And part of that is in the master plan. Part of that is those discussions around, do you create quarters? So in the night time, we just have one area of town, which makes it easier to resource. Or does that actually mean that we end up with parts of town that are no-go areas? So actually what we need to look at is how we have a spread of nighttime economy. Also recognising that different people like different things. Our biggest problem sometimes is not the actual crime numbers, it's the perception of what's going on, which makes people fearful. How do we overcome that? We're looking at things like, in some of the public realm schemes, what are the things that we can put in place that makes certain areas like Cross Church Street, for instance, feel safer and easier to manage. We've also been looking at where we have reduced resources. So one example here was, I think it was to do with the CCTV, and they no longer had the resource to go out after a certain time because they were down to one person, they needed two people, and it was a simple thing of, okay, we can put a PCSO in there with that the police were providing the support to make sure that our CCTV people could continue. So we're looking at that, but the question was actually about how do we diversify the offer. And that is where we need to make more the existing offer visible. There is a theatre here. There is a concert hall. There are some very, very good restaurants. I mean, we have an amazing, diverse range of restaurants within Huddersfield. But what we are still quite weak at is marketing the area. And I know Councillor Murgatroyd, you talked about a brand for the area, and those are the aspects we need to look at. And that's why in the report and in the presentation, Simon and I talk a lot about there are 3 things that need to be tackled. One is the quality of the public realm, the quality of our buildings, the bricks and mortar stuff. The other is the offer. What are we offering? Are we offering enough to the diversity of people that we want to attract? An example of that is nighttime economy at the moment. What do you think about? Pubs, drinking, it's all alcohol based. Actually, large sections of our population want non-alcohol areas. So is there some kind of intervention we can make that enables that to happen? But the third thing is perception, and that perception is around how we communicate and how we market ourselves. And through that, that's going to attract people in who kind of go, I want to be a part of that story, but we're not telling the story at the moment.
If I could just ask my second question, and it sort of links with the first one really. In the bullet points which summarise the recommendations from the Grimsey report, it looks at things like libraries, public spaces, galleries and so on, and it talks about embracing smart technology. Yeah, I'm sure that's important, but given the fact that people can use smart technology almost anywhere now, are other things actually more important, such as providing experiences for people? Because if you look at the trends, people are not buying things. People do value experiences where they meet things that aren't in live, they're meeting with other people. So what kind of thinking has happened so far, and what kind of planning will take place to look at how we can build a real quality experience element into libraries and galleries as they develop?
I think the honest truth is that thinking's not advanced enough at the moment because of the concentration on how do we just reduce resources. So some of the recommendations in the Grimsey report are things about, particularly in terms of the nighttime economy, or I'm going to refer to the evening economy, because nighttime tends to be later on, and if we look at that evening economy, they suggest that art galleries stay open later, libraries stay open, that they're seen as those meeting spaces, and at this moment in time, the resources are not there to do it. So I think we need to start looking in a more creative way around when our citizens want to access those services. And it's one of the things when we're talking to market traders at the moment, traditionally, markets opened very early in the morning and then they tend to shut at 3 in the afternoon or whatever. And it's saying to the traders, that's not what the public wants anymore. If you're working all day, if you finish at 5, 6 o'clock, you want to be able to go and then buy. That's why the supermarkets are doing so well, because when the supermarkets extended their opening hours, everybody went to the supermarket. So we just need to look at, are there other times of the day when we're not being used as much? Do we actually shut, and do we redirect the resources into the times when people want us? And it's one of the things we did with our museums when we were transforming the museums. We looked at the customer pattern, we talked to the customers. That is why you find now that we are open at the weekends and we're open at bank holidays, because the customer, our visitors said, on the day when we're off work and we want to come and see you, you're closed. So that's what we did, but it meant we had to shut during the week. But it's just how we use our resources in a much more effective way.
I mean, the point about marketing is well made. But I mean, there was a big launch presentation, birthday event, where Huddersfield placed a maker or something. Everybody's walking about with lapel badges with H on. So what happened to that? The question now I wanted to ask is on page 7 or page 5, depending on which page numbers you're looking at. It talks about the outcomes of a previous report from 2015 with 6 recommendations on over the page. And it says that this panel may want to review the recommendations to see if they're still relevant. I would have hoped that before Cabinet went down this process, they'd have looked at those and identified which were relevant and which needed adapting. It shouldn't be, as we've got this started developing projects, it shouldn't be for the scrutiny panel to turn around and look at issues about have we got a group with regulatory services, have we got an action plan. That should have been done by Cabinet. Yeah, but they're asking, the 2.34 says that this panel may want to review those. Well, I would have expected those to have been reviewed by Cabinet before they went down this process.
About them is that now 3.5 years old, those recommendations, what progress has been made about those in the last 3.5 years? Because that's like, what's the situation with those 6 recommendations? Because I'm with Councillor Balls. I don't want to review those now. I want to hear how the council's got on with implementing those 6, and then we can do some more thinking about how we move on from there.
Yeah, so it's thinking about what is the process going forward and look at these and look at ensure with format and where things are being achieved, what actually works for me.
I think you make a good point, actually, and I was looking at these 6 points, and I don't think enough progress has been made on all of them. I think the Dewsbury stuff stands out because yes, we do have an action plan, we do have the vision, we've been sharing that with partners. We've only just started that journey with Huddersfield. So you're absolutely right. We need to refocus back on these 6 points and pick up where that sort of 2015 set of recommendations left off, really. I think part of that is to do with resources, lots of changes in personnel. I mean, I'm quite new to this town centre regeneration process. Some of our experienced officers have left the council now, so there's that sort of issue to sort of tackle as well.
I thought that Martin asked a very pertinent question earlier on about measurement and how you measure the success or failure of your efforts for the town centre. There's a lot of talk about footfall, which is not a word familiar to me, but I would have thought that if the footfall increases, then you've got a measurement standard. And that's really what you're looking for. You want people to come into the town centre, don't you? You want to boost the town centre to get people in. There's an old adage which just springs to mind. It used to be said that Yorkshire people are easily led, provided you lead them the way they want to go. Now, if you want people to come into the town centre, you've got to ask them basically the way they want to go. I'm not sure whether you've done enough survey. I'd like to think that people have gone to the few town centres that appear to be a great success with vast numbers of people. Has somebody been there to ask people why they're there and what they went for? I mean, what do people actually want of a town centre? Now, as a pensioner, I may not be an average pensioner, but I don't want the town centre for anything that I can think of, except because they've closed the local bank, I'm forced to come into the bank once in a while, or to see a solicitor, or perhaps to come to a concert in the evening. But otherwise, I put it this way, I read the Examiner, and as a result, I wouldn't dream of coming into the town after dark. Now, I know that's a stupid misperception, yet at the same time, I know a lot of people of my own age who stay well out of the place. Well, of course, the entertainment provided in clubs and so forth isn't designed for us anyway, so that might not be significant. But when it comes to shopping and so forth, I can't get the car near. I can't walk very far. I'm not decrepit enough to have one of those little buggies to run around in. So what do we do exactly? I'm very nervous about the bus gate scheme. Probably going to get fined if I bring my car into town. I'm very discouraged. And I'm afraid that Amazon for shopping has just got the town licked. Now, we both buy most of our stuff, my wife and myself, from the web, even the groceries. And we perhaps do it a little guiltily because we would like to support the town. But basically, we don't need the town centre. We're talking about diversity. You want older people as well as younger people coming in and so forth. But I think you've got to start at grassroots, and you should be asking people exactly what they want, rather than saying, right, we've got this beautiful town now, we've got all our flower boxes and things, and we've improved our buildings. Why aren't you here?
Yeah, I think that is you made some really good points there, and I think the point that we have to listen to what people want, and the fact we've got a very diverse population with different needs, it is really important that all the different groups within society are listened to. So issues such as some older people, some younger people may have accessibility issues once they get into the town centre. What could we do to help tackle those kind of problems? The timing of things. Yeah, some good points there.
There is a piece of work going on at the moment in economy and infrastructure looking at what is the data intelligence that we actually need for the future. And I think that's in recognition of maybe when we haven't got the right data intelligence in order to inform our decisions. So footfall's a really interesting one because everybody talks about footfall in terms of the health of town centres. Footfall tells you somebody walked into your town centre, they may have looked at it and walked out again. That doesn't mean that they've contributed to the economy in any way. And so one of the things we need to look at is the measurements that we have at the moment, are they the best measurements? Are they telling us what we need to know? So as I say, that work is starting at the moment, looking at that, and also there are certain things we want to know, and we just can't find a way to measure it because the resources needed to do that are just so huge. So asking people what they want is actually a really expensive process if you're going to do that well. So again, we need to look at what can we afford to do in order to get enough data and intelligence to make really well-informed decisions.
Yeah, this is actually an issue that came up on Monday at the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, which was about how we collect data, but very importantly, how we then present that data in a way that picks out the key issues and allows both officers and elected members to have a good overview of what's happening, so they're aware of the issues. Comes back to the point I think you made very first question, Martin, that you need to know what it is we're trying to achieve, and then you need to get feedback so you can monitor effectively whether or not that's happening. And if we can't do that, it's very difficult for us to do our job as members of the scrutiny panel. Right.
So I think we've touched on a number of issues in that first session, and I might be in danger of repeating myself here. So I just wanted to go through sort of initiatives in each of the town centres to show that there was some direction of travel, really, that was positive. The key thing for Huddersfield is we've not had a plan of action, not in my time at the council, really, and that's a few years. So we've set about trying to develop a master plan that tries to pull in as many stakeholders as we possibly can in the timeframes that we've been given. The aim is to try and end that process at the end of this year, at least pull that information into one place at the end of the year, and trying to get that to align with the Grimesy report recommendations. So we have an action plan, think about the vision, those types of things. And those stakeholder events are underway. Now, I think we could probably add some more in, and that's what I want to do, and I need to target that, and that's my responsibility. I think this is a really good tool and it doesn't address, having a master plan is not going to address every issue about the town centre, but it just gives us a bit of a blueprint on which to refer back to, and it helps us to try and focus some of our investment decisions as well. And that's the important part of it as well. We will follow that up with, as I say, with more formal processes around the local plan, that'll be very detailed and pick on much smaller sites and maybe a tighter geographical area. So that work is underway, and I'm quite hopeful that that's a step in the right direction. In terms of projects that are underway, we've touched already on the sort of living offer in Huddersfield, and I do get this issue around student accommodation, and we might be nearing the point of saturation. I'm not seeing through the planning process as many planning applications for student accommodation as I once did. I think we're probably at a point where people are sort of thinking maybe I can't let those out. But we've got a couple of high quality developments that have been completed. The Dundas Street work, it's called Dundas Works now. It's on Dundas Street opposite the bus station. It's just been completed. The internal fit out there is pretty high quality. I can't remember ever living in student accommodation like that. It actually has actually has heating in it. So, but they are very high spec, and I've shown a little picture of a typical layout from Standard House there, and that shows the type of market that you're catering for at Huddersfield University, potentially sort of to overseas students, but they are of a high standard. The other thing that is underway and is currently on the strip out stage now is the conversion of the old co-op building at 103 New Street. Quite controversial in its own right. There is a big extension to go on that. It's been through the planning process, it's been through the processes with Historic England as well. That will be a major investment in that end of New Street and should be a positive step forward. I also think we shouldn't ignore the role of the university in terms of their campus. They've certainly set the bar in terms of build quality. You've already got the building on Shorehead, the Osler building, and we are seeing the Barbara Hepworth building going up at the moment, which fronts on to the canal. Now, they're not truly town centre, but what you are seeing is the quality of architecture that we should aspire to through that process. And how does that feed back into the town centre? So you've got some projects under the way, and somebody's already mentioned the role of the student and the university in maintaining the vibrancy of the town centre. Quality and public realm. A couple of weeks ago, Cabinet considered a design framework document, which was designed to increase the quality of our streetscape. So it's standards that we're expecting our maintenance colleagues to work to, the standards that we're expecting new public realm works to aspire to. And I think it's actually a good document to set the quality bar, and it's down to the council and developers to work to those standards. If you look around the town centre, there is a hodgepodge of materials. Quality is not so great in some areas, and we're trying to drag that up. That will be a long-term process, but if we keep to the framework recommendations, then that quality should increase over time. We've also, on the back of that, secured some funding for 3 key public realm projects. The first of those is at New Street, looking at that whole section of New Street to see whether or not we can work out a strategy to improve that public realm from its sort of slightly dated 80s feel, very hard, sort of outdated appearance, and work forward a new project that is based in a sort of short-term, medium-term and long-term. So I'm quite hopeful that that will come up with some sort of fairly innovative ideas. We know that we need to try and aspire to the Healthy Streets programme. I don't know if you know much about that, but it's initiatives taken from Transport for London. It's quite popular at the moment with government in terms of attracting some new funding in. It's about creating spaces that people want to be in, creating spaces that people can walk around and cycle around as well. So feeding into the healthy agenda. Cross Church Street, for me, is absolutely key to sort out. And I would say now, the public realm part of that is only part of it. Obviously, there are uses there that are not necessarily compatible with an inclusive town centre, but actually the streetscape and the quality of the sort of urban fabric is pretty poor as well. And we need to acknowledge that Cross Church Street is a very busy street. It is often the street within the town centre that most visitors to Kingsgate experience. It's that street that you probably navigate through when you're coming from the train station to the university. It's not an attractive environment. So tackling the issues there, streetscape-wise, traffic management-wise, and socially and economically as well, we need to have a big push to make that a more exemplar part of the town. Queensgate is also on our radar. We have a scheme that helps to try and bridge that gap between the university and the town. So Queensgate is that section of the ring road that runs in front of the main university entrance. And we're quite keen to make that a more pedestrian-friendly environment. We're not going to take all the traffic out of that area. That would be impossible at this stage, but that's what we want to work towards. And there are better ways to tackle what is going on there to help that linkage between the university into the town more amenable. And you'll see as well, we've already got a programme of place fixing initiatives going on around the town. There's some funding being put to one side to sort out some of the underlying sort of problems in the town in terms of streetscape, and you can see one of those is King Street. That's already been relayed with its proper sets to bring that back into well, the original concept was that you had a nice pedestrianised area that cafes and bars could spill out onto. If you went there last summer, you would have seen that, but actually the streetscape at that time was so decrepit that it wasn't quite the experience that everybody wanted. So we're putting all that back now. So there's a few projects there. I think they're very important projects. We talk a lot about buildings and uses, but actually moving around the town in a quality way with quality streetscape is vitally important. Emerging projects, we've got a couple that I think everybody knows about. Kingsgate Extension, and we are currently working with Kingsgate owners around a new planning application that looks at the House of Fraser end of the store. I think that those owners are very alive to the changing market around town centres. They are quite good at reacting to those changes, and they quite often put in proposals that will ensure that their business investment can survive long term. The current application is for sort of a refit of that end of the town for more leisure sort of food uses. We've also got an application in for a sort of a hotel as well, which fits into a gap into the existing Kingsgate development. Trinity 1 is the posh name for the old college site. We're dealing with a planning application for a mixed use there, residential, some office, a small supermarket, on what is quite a difficult site because it has a large listed building on it which we need to work around. And that's currently a planning application as well, and we're currently consulting and engaging with Historic England on that. I'm pretty sure we'll come to a decision sometime in the new year for that one. A couple of things I've highlighted on there are where council assets relating to the town centre are being marketed. We are currently out to the market on the Southgate site, which is the boarded site at the beginning of the A62, and also our estate buildings ownership, which fronts onto St George's Square. I think two pretty important sites for that end of the town. Get the uses right there, and you could anchor a lot of, come back to your point, footfall around that area and make it a very vibrant part of the town. In terms of Huddersfield Town Centre offer, I think we've listed here sort of a few areas that we are considering around the master plan: reinventing the markets, new museum and art gallery facilities, bringing more culture and art into the public realm areas, potential for a new archive centre. How does that fit into the town centre? If you see what they've done in Wakefield, you've got some high quality new builds going on there. Making sure that we increase and diversify the events, which we think is a really positive part of Huddersfield at the moment. Looking at the nighttime economy strategy, and also we've got Purple Flag there. I don't know if you'd say something about Purple Flag.
You've heard of Green Flag, haven't you, for parks? Purple Flag is a kind of an award that town centres go for that's around their nighttime economy. And it looks at things like accessibility, safety, marketing, offer, all of those things. It was the police that actually first approached us last year and said they wanted to go for Purple Flag status. We brought lots of partners together, including the business sector, cultural organisations, the police, council services, and we assessed where are we at in terms of going for Purple Flag status for Huddersfield. No surprise, we're quite a way away, but we already have quite a few things in place. What came out of the workshop with the people there saying, actually, what we need first of all is a nighttime economy strategy. We need to start putting those things in place, and once we've done that, we will naturally be able to go for Purple Flag status. So that is kind of one of the plans at the moment, and we're just needing to kind of move on that at the moment.
I've moved on to the next slide, which is the major investment opportunity. I think we've touched on some of this. The two bits I wanted to pick out were Transpennine Upgrade. If you're not familiar with Transpennine Upgrade, it is the government's intention to invest in the link from York through to Manchester, improving journey speeds, improving the rail offer. Now, a large section of that route runs through Kirklees, and there are massive benefits to Kirklees communities, and the opportunity is pretty great around Huddersfield Station. If you're going to squeeze new trains, longer trains into the station, you need to think about how that station is reprofiled. Our aim with the second line there about Station Gateway funding £10 million from West Yorkshire Transport Fund is to connect the car park and the warehouse at the back of the station with the front of the station. So how do you get direct access into St George's Square? Now that is a big ask. It is dependent on the rail upgrade. There is funding for us to take that element forward, but we think it's an absolute catalyst to getting the station warehouse into some sort of refurbishment or reuse. So at the moment, it's very isolated. You have to access the back via the road. There's only a small pedestrian entrance from on the bus station side, and it's not exactly well connected to the rest of the town. So we are hopeful that we'll get an announcement at the end of the year. I think I might have been promised that last year, but
we'll see it next week.
Well,
the latest.
Oh, is it? Oh, well,
it's likely to be there.
Oh, that's good. Well, I was hopeful it was going to come through in the budget, but there was no mention of it in the budget. So yeah, we might be on course for that. Transpennine Upgrade is the first in a series of large rail projects that encompass that one, HS2, and then Transpennine, Northern Powerhouse Rail. Sorry, thank you for that, Martin. Northern Powerhouse Rail. which is much more longer term. And I think this is the one, this is the starting point for this.
NPR is not an opportunity for us.
No, it's not. No, it's not. The TransPennine is.
Yeah.
It is.
We'll talk about Bradford.
Yeah. I've listed a few transport projects there that are feeding into the town. I think some of them are well documented in the press. I think A62 Smart Corridor was in the Examiner last night. A629 is at Halifax Road. So those projects are about getting people to the town centre and out of the town centre more effectively. The last point on there is about transforming cities. West Yorkshire Combined Authority with the districts is leading on a bid to government for funding, which is based around gateways and corridors in the city region. Huddersfield and Dewsbury are two named gateways and corridors, and we are currently working with the Combined Authority on a package of transport improvements that could feed into that. We have no guarantee of that funding, but we are through the first gateway. So it is a big opportunity for bringing in extra money. I'm going to probably ask Adele to talk about the Huddersfield bid, because I think this is an important slide in terms of working with businesses at the moment.
We recognise that the future of Huddersfield Town Centre can't be done by the council on its own. This really has to be about working in partnership with local businesses. A bid, a business improvement district, is something that's been going for about 20 years in this country, and this is where a levy is placed on those that pay business rates, and that levy is then decided by the businesses themselves as to what they spend that money on. And what will be really important here is that instead of the businesses going off at a tangent and doing whatever they want to do and it being out of sync, is that we're actually working together here, and that extra levy is about the businesses themselves investing in the town centre and making things happen in the plans that they want to see maybe accelerated, or they want to put those resources in. So at the moment, the Huddersfield Town Centre Partnership is leading on putting this bid together. What will happen is next year, probably about June 2019, unless there's a snap general election, they will go out and ballot all those paying business rates in the defined area. So at the moment, that defined area is looking at within the ring road, and parts of it are slightly out of the ring road. They will ballot those businesses to see if those businesses are prepared to pay that levy. If those businesses are prepared to pay, then a few months later, the council will start to collect that additional levy on top of the business rates. One of the things we need to do the assessment about at the moment is all the figures was based on the kind of status quo, but with the announcement last week in the budget around kind of business rates relief for SMEs, we now need to look at how that's going to affect the levy and how much we could expect to collect in terms of the bid. Been really, really popular in certain parts of the country and has been really positive in those areas, and this is really about businesses taking the lead. In some areas, it hasn't been as successful, and that is because, particularly in areas where there's a lot of SMEs, you know, it's an extra tax to those businesses that are already struggling, and that they haven't actually been able to collect as much money as they first thought, and so there hasn't been a lot of progress made. Hopefully in Huddersfield, we'll be in the kind of positive, this will be a benefit, rather than actually this is just not working.
Right, I'm very conscious of time now, because I had hoped to finish about 12 o'clock-ish. So we've asked quite a lot of questions which were related to Huddersfield in the first section. Are there any further questions which specifically relate to Huddersfield and things that have come up in Simon and Adele's presentation? Yeah, Matt.
Thanks, Robbie. Simon mentioned St George's Warehouse, which I'm sure many of us have still got the T-shirts and scarves from over many years, but I remember when I was lead member, Peter McBride was adamant that we could link from St George's Square through to the other side by a former tunnel that was there, a goods tunnel or something. So I hope that's now coming to fruition. We've had a feasibility done on that now that Peter's a cabinet member to make his aspiration from 10 years ago a reality. On the bid, I'd be interested to see the business model, obviously not just for Huddersfield, but see how it works, because presumably there's an admin cost. Yeah, as you said, the revenue raising depends on how much rates you get in, but there will be some element of administration with it, won't it, to run it and administer the business expenditure of how that's going to work. So I'd be interested, maybe you can send it on later if you want, Adele, so that we can probably have a look at it back in our own areas to see whether we can get our traders, if they're interested in this regeneration perspective. But as you rightly say, it's a bit like turkeys voting for Christmas. Are they going to vote to have more money taxed on them?
Can I just respond to that? Need to remember that business plan is not ours at the council, but it may be one of the things you want to do is to invite somebody from Huddersfield Bid to come in and to present that business plan to you and to understand more about the bid. And we could set that up and arrange that.
The council will be a partner, so we've got access to it.
We do.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Judy. Kirklees Council used to be a key partner in the Town Centre Partnership, so I mean that's one question, who's involved now. So we shouldn't need to ask them for sight of the business model. I would hope we could have that so we can look at ourselves. Whether we look as a panel, whether we look at individuals, but surely Kirklees will have information about the bid.
Oh, sorry,
Partnership have got a consultant working on that business plan. Yes, you're quite right. We are there are two elected members that sit on the steering group for the Huddersfield bid. That's Councillor Naheed Mather and also Councillor Julie Stewart-Turner. So in that way, we have an involvement. I guess my point and why I feel uncomfortable about, as a council, presenting you with that bid is this is being led by those businesses, and I really think that if we are going forward and working in partnership, it would be really good to recognise that it's theirs and to actually get them to come in.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. I think possibly also, I think we need to perhaps look at what's happening more broadly in terms of the partnerships. Possibly we could set up a subgroup to investigate that, working with you, and then before the end of the year ask the bid group and possibly other potential partners to come in to talk through how they see their input into what's happening. Does that seem a sensible suggestion? Yes.
Thank you. I'll be very, very brief, Mr. Chairman. Talking about the bid, I'm a little bit worried about what happens if there's a small, let's say similar to Brexit, there's a small majority that says, yes, we want it. Lots of town centre businesses say, look, we can't afford an extra 1.5%. Are we going to prosecute those business owners for not paying the extra 1.5%? Are we going to put them out of business? Thank you.
I think it's a valid point, and this is where I'm struggling in my brain files to remember what the percentage is. It's quite a complicated thing of there has to be a certain majority. It's not just a simple 51% agree to this. There has to be a certain majority that agree to it, and that majority that agree to it have to represent something like more than 50% of the levy that would be collected. I may have got that wrong, because when I read it, I was like, this is all very complicated, but it kind of has that fail-safe, really, to make sure that a substantial majority of the businesses are signed up to this. But you are quite right that those businesses that are not signed up to it could then find themselves being chased for that levy.
Right. So could I suggest, I'm very conscious that we haven't moved on to look at Dewsbury yet, and I don't really, I want to try and avoid them being neglected. So if I could suggest that we, at the end of the meeting, if people are interested in becoming part of a working group to look at partnerships, look at what's happening with the bid project and other things within the partnership, then we can bring it back to a meeting in the new year. Right, if we have two very quick questions then. Harpreet first, then Richard, and then we'll move on to Dewsbury.
Oh, it's on. Thanks for the second part of that presentation. It's really useful. I think there's obviously some good work that's going to be going on around the station. And I'm just wondering, you know, we've got a great square there, haven't we? And I think it's a great thing to look out in terms of the town centre. There's just a bit more thought about how we could perhaps use that a little bit better. We've got a lot of people coming in back into the town centre after work. Is there something that we could do more with entrepreneurs? We talked about the market offer. Is there something we could do? I know there's going to be cost to all this sort of stuff as well, so that's something that needs to be considered. But, you know, artisan bakeries and all this sort of stuff, the type of people that are going to be coming back in, I'm sure they won't mind, you know, having a look at buying some fresh bread or whatever. I'm just wondering if that's something that you've considered, because I know there's one store at the moment that sells cheese and bread, and the woman sells that pretty quickly. So it's just having a look at that a bit more. And I think the stuff you've said about New Street and Piazza, I mean, that for me, when I look out in the town centre from, you know, St George's Square, and then I think about New Street and Piazza, definitely, I think we do need to do some work there. And again, if we look at how we could use that space a little bit better. We've got, I know the Piazza is privately owned, but we've got the green space in the middle there, haven't we, which is council. What can we do a little bit more about using that as an urban green space and make it a bit more attractive to families as well, really? So I won't go on. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
In terms of attracting businesses, it is something that we thought about, and we will try. But it's the same problem that we're having with our markets at the moment, is those traders are just not out there wanting to come. But if there is anybody, we will of course talk to them and make sure that they can do something, reduce the red tape and get on with it. You'll be pleased to know the Winter Festival is going to be back in St George's Square throughout December and into January, so we will have something there. But some of the discussions we've had about the master plan is the future St George's Square. When it was redesigned a few years ago, my criticism was we had 4 key outcomes we wanted for the square that actually were not complementary. So we created a transport interchange and then said we wanted it to be an event square, and actually we have all kinds of problems with that. So it's looking at really what do we do in the future, make sure it's a complementary space. I'd love to see it kind of not a transport interchange, to move the transport to elsewhere. This is just my personal thought. But with that comes that then attracting businesses around the square that might put street cafes out, things like that during the summer, and really make it a social space. But as I say, that's just my opinion. And again, that has to be matched with lots of different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in the discussion, you know, people were quite rightly saying there's always a tension between kind of organic growth that comes from entrepreneurship and from council-led kind of initiatives. But there was one thing I was going to ask you about, and I kind of hesitate in a way because it's like it actually relates to things I saw on holiday, and it's, you know, like the equivalent when you go on holiday and you really love that liqueur, and when you come back and you think, oh God, but nevertheless, so basically both in York and Vienna, what I saw was that there were these old markets, very similar perhaps to what we've got in the town. But what the local authorities had done, they'd created an infrastructure, a fixed infrastructure of tables and umbrellas and blah, blah, blah. And basically they had a kind of street food offer built around them. In York, it was actually mobile, temporary kind of street food things. In Vienna, they were a little bit more permanent. So, I suppose, really, I mean, you know, when you think of some places like Queensgate or whatever, I mean, it just would seem perhaps that could be a council-led initiative that probably wouldn't cost that much money to get going, but might actually have a tremendous impact on those. So anyway, I just thought I'd put those. But
can I just respond to that as well? One of the things that we're looking at through the master planning work is, can we put the infrastructure in place that allows pop-up initiatives to happen? So often for events and for markets, etc., one of the biggest problems is access to power. So do we start to build that into our public realm to make it so much easier for things to happen? And then, just again responding is, where we can cut the red tape, we will. And the example I use is, my team in the creative economy found out that licensing used to audition buskers. So we were finding there were very good buskers from Huddersfield that were getting on the train and going to Leeds, but not busking here. And one of the things, it sounds so much more vibrant in the streets when there's music playing, we got that stopped. You know, and that's why you've seen over the last few months that growth in musicians. And I've got to say, most of them are pretty good. There's no need to audition them. They're actually offering something back.
I think what's coming out of this, I think we need to look at what you said earlier on. People don't know what we've already got. And we have got pop-up businesses. We've done it before. We've done it in the Packhorse. We've done it in Queensgate. We've got the food in the Packhorse Centre above, and they've had street food in there. So these things have gone on, but I don't know if everyone understands what we have done and what we've tried, because we seem to be going round in circles here.
Yeah, it's something that keeps coming up about the perception and the communication of a positive message. I definitely think that's something that needs to focus. Right, I'm very conscious of time. Are we happy to go on till 12:15? Sorry. Right. What about everybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Could I just let Martin come in first, Mark, and then... Could I just let Martin speak first, then I'll come back to you. Yeah, Martin.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chair. Just to answer the point that was asked earlier on about the vote for a business improvement district, because it says on the website, a successful vote is a simple majority, both in votes cast and rateable values. And interestingly, each business is entitled one vote in respect of each property. So there are issues there about the vote that somebody owns multiple properties can sway the vote. And very interesting, as Judith highlighted when we were scrolling, the local authority has the power of veto.
Yeah, if we can come, as I said earlier, if we could come back to that, if you want. Thank you, Martin. Yes, and it is one of the things that we will return to look at in a little more detail with the smaller group. Yeah, Mark.
You'll have to forgive my ignorance, but it says that we like to charge a levy. Right? If I'm a small business man in a centre, a small shopkeeper or something, you're going to come along and tell me you're going to develop projects which will benefit my business, but I'm going to have to decide which the projects are. Now, has anybody got a clear image of what sort of projects are going to be offered to the people who are going to pay the levy? I mean, in practical terms.
I think that's another important issue linked to this. So if we could come back and, in a smaller group, look at this in a little bit more detail where we've got more time, I think that's something that we need to capture as something that we follow up. Yeah, I think it's a good point.
Is there any chance of just one example?
Marketing the town centre. Marketing the town centre, promoting the businesses that are here. Another one has been to look at accessibility, increasing disabled access, things like that within the town centre. Some of it is just cleaning the town centre.
It's actually down to the town centre partnership themselves, what they would want to do, and they'd have to agree between themselves what they wanted to do. Not up to us, a council, to tell them what to do.
Yeah, which I think is an important point, that we get the partners in the partnership have got to decide on the priorities, haven't they? Right, if we can move on now to have a look at Dewsbury. I'm just very conscious with the time we've got, even if we've gone till 15:15, Probably not got time really to go through the slides in detail. Are there kind of headlines which you would like to pick out, Simon, and then we can ask questions?
And Steve and Peter might well be able to help me out on some of these things. I've spoken a little bit about the strategic development frame, and that's just the sort of the policy and planning side around it all. And we've also touched on that, those key projects and programmes, activity, attractiveness and improving accessibility. I'm just going to perhaps concentrate on a couple of key town centre projects. It's really important that we remember that there is activity in Dewsbury, and a shining example of that is the Springfield Centre that's now open. It's a new college building on Halifax Road, very close to the town centre. 1,600 students a day go to that centre. It's vitally important for the vibrancy of the town. And if you link that with what will come of Pioneer House, is another 1,000 students into that building. We've actually created a reason for people to come to Dewsbury. Now, Pioneer House has its problems, but it's a big lump of Victoriana with lots of problems, and we are working through that, and we should be back. We are back on track with the refurbishment, and that's likely to open again in 2020. These types of initiatives that bring people into the town or close to the town are absolutely essential, and I think it's one of the things that Dewsbury's lacking at the moment is people using it. If you go there at times, it's pretty quiet, to say the least, and part of that is who owns the town, what communities are interested in. It's probably not a town for any of the communities in Dewsbury, but student life, that could be the start of upping the ante on Dewsbury Town Centre as a whole. We've done some work around Dewsbury Market. Lots of people perceive Dewsbury Market as a really important asset. We've done some work around revisioning the market offer, and we need to feed that back to members, the market traders and stakeholder groups as well. So we're well on with that. Living Town, concentrating on that Daisy Hill area, we've identified that as an area where potentially we can deliver some new housing. We've had some architects in to help us devise a development framework for that, which we need signing off. So there are initiatives there that are potentially going to come to fruition quite soon. The Better Spaces stuff, you'll see an example of that at the moment, where works are due to start on Northgate in March, which is fronting on to Pioneer House. Again, there's some money for sort of street works in around the town centre to take off, and we're also looking at a town park concept as well, which we've just gone out to feasibility to consultants, or just about to. And I shouldn't ignore that the works that's going on around the station at the moment. There's about £1 million of public realm works that have been delivered right today in front of the station. A better way of connecting up the station with the town, and it's a consequence of the new student community coming into those areas. We've had running for a number of years Townscape Heritage Initiative, looking at refurbing of buildings, shop fronts, and we've got a number of projects that have come to fruition. You've got a couple of examples in the photographs there where you see traditional shop fronts being brought back into those buildings. Take-up has been okay. Still got a few projects to deliver, but it was funding that we wouldn't have been able to find in the council. So it's been a useful exercise, and it probably needs another look at. Heritage Action Zone, funding with Historic England to bring buildings back into use. We've got a 5-year programme supporting 7 projects, £2.5 million worth of investment, and we are, I don't know how many there are in the country. Do you know how many there are in the country, houses? Yeah, but not a massive amount, and certainly Historic England were very keen on Dewsbury because of the amount of listed buildings, but also because that connection into communities that are normally not associated with heritage projects. So we've done quite a bit. We will be doing quite a bit of work in that area, but it's useful investment in the town, and again links back to the Daisy Hill area as well. Improving accessibility. We mentioned the Dewsbury Station Gateway Scheme. Murfield to Dewsbury to Leeds is a transport project that we are working on, and Martin has raised that. Sorry? Oh, sorry. I mean, Ravensthorpe to Dewsbury to Leeds. And that's a series of sort of highway improvements across that corridor from on the A64 and the A653, plus what we need to do around the town centre. And again, I'll raise these issues of emerging transport opportunities. Transpennine upgrade is just as important to the Dewsbury, Murfield, Ravensthorpe area as it is to Huddersfield. It could be transformational. And again, I've mentioned transforming cities in that, which is the package of work so that we are working with us to develop. And I think that is it on Dewsbury. That was a bit of a whistle-stop store, but I think we have touched on a lot of stuff in our previous discussion. Yeah.
We haven't got time now for questions. Peter, you've been sitting there very patiently. You may well want to come in at this session. Right, who likes that? Judy.
It's a comment, it's not a question. I recently went up to Daisy Hill. I've never been there before. And you can really see what that could turn into, that old market town. I thought it was fabulous. So I'm looking forward to all that getting finished.
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation. I was actually quite interested in the town park as well. I think that's potentially a very interesting idea. So I'll definitely keep an eye on that, and if we can be kept updated on that. I mean, I don't know if you'll be doing anything around sort of looking at how we can use that town park for things like as an urban farm, or how we can like look at growing fruit and vegetables and involving kids in things like that as well. Particularly if we want to tackle issues around deprivation as well, and the health inequalities in our area. So that's really good. And on top of that, it's just looking at how we might be building in things like making it a dementia-friendly place, and also about the disability access. So I think that's really important. And then just one more point about CLES. Obviously, CLES is doing all this, Centre for Local Economic Studies is doing all this work about how we keep money in the town centre, or we keep money in Kirklees. So just looking at how that'll fit in with the work that we're doing in the town centres as well. And just a big plea around the inequalities, that for me is just a massive issue, and if we're not looking at that in everything we do, then we're probably missing something. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I'll break quite a number of issues there.
Just to say that we're looking at all those things. It's very early days at the moment. Probably the feasibility study will start in spring next year. As part of the brief, we're trying to cover as much as we can, but ultimately, when we do the scheme, hopefully, there'll be some compromises to be made along. We can't accommodate every single thing, but got some quite radical ideas for the long causeway, but it remains to be seen, obviously, whether we have the ambition and want to take the risk to make that happen, and also the money, of course, which will become cheap.
Come on that. We're talking about the dementia friendly. We have been working for many years on that in Dewsbury and Huddersfield, well across Kirklees, the Kirklees Dementia Alliance. I don't know if you're aware of that, and we have put money into that. And we've also, from the council, worked on safe places in our town centres. So that's already there. So going back again, I think we need to know what is going on out there.
Harpreet.
We recognised by Alzheimer's Society in terms of that?
I can't answer that. That's something I'd have to go back and find out. Yeah.
Different colour flag.
It's basically something that you get recognised through the Alzheimer's Society. So no,
I think at the moment there are individual venues that are recognised as dementia friendly,
rather than the whole.
But I don't think the whole of the town is recognised.
Yeah.
Martin, did you want to ask a question?
Just a quick, Dewsbury's had regeneration committees and one thing and another, probably since Adam was a lad, but have they looked at a business improvement district? Are the traders wanting to do anything to get on board themselves like that?
In Dewsbury? No, not at this moment. In fact, I understand that in Dewsbury the kind of partnership dissolved some time ago, but a new group has got together and established themselves as the Chamber of Trade at the moment and are looking at how they move things forward, but they haven't got to that stage yet of thinking about a bid. I think once if Huddersfield goes for it and votes for it, I think that will kick-start across the district, others starting to look at it.
If I just add to that, I think the conditions in Dewsbury are a bit different to Huddersfield in terms of scale and also existing partnership arrangements, and also because of that, not only is it a lot smaller than Huddersfield, rates are a lot lower. So actually what you can generate in terms of any levy is significantly less than Huddersfield. So the question is, if there was some interest in it, is actually whether it's worth the effort, because there is quite a lot of time and effort needs to go into that to set it up for what you get out of it. But it's there on the table, it's a possibility, but I think probably if it has to work in Huddersfield first to see if it works there.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. I was very encouraged by the Dewsbury report because it's obviously further on than Huddersfield, and therefore I was looking forward to the same range of things in the Huddersfield exercise in 2 or 3 years' time, I guess. But I came away concerned that in both cases, a lot of what we're doing is prettifying the environment. We haven't really got the nub of what the issue is. If you go to the Northern Quarter in Manchester, it's as scruffy as hell. It's quite edgy, as I said before. The buildings look quite rough, but it's very vibrant, very active. There's a lot of money being spent, and it's going on for 12, 15 hours a day. Now, I don't know how they did it, but it wasn't by improving the tarmac or improving the buildings or improving the street fronts. It's a very different sort of setup, and I think we just need to. That's what you want. You want the vibrancy, and with the vibrancy, obviously, comes economic regeneration. I haven't got the answer to this, but there's, it's just avoiding spending millions of pounds on a city, on a town looking really pretty. And I want a pretty environment, a smart environment, but there's nobody there.
Chair.
My continuing concern with all this.
Chair, I think one of the issues is around critical mass and numbers of people. Obviously, Manchester is much larger. Also, demographics. It's around numbers of people and money they've got to spend. And clearly, you've got that in shed loads in Manchester. Quite different circumstances in both Dewsbury and Huddersfield. So I think aspirations have to be related to, obviously, the scope of the demographics and potential draw you can get for those towns. But it's not to say there isn't potential in both towns and town centres to draw those sort of people who have a bit more disposable income, the sort of people who you might see around the Northern Quarter in Manchester, spending their money and time in Dewsbury and in Huddersfield.
You've just reminded me of some work I did years and years ago when I worked back in Wakefield, and where we studied this kind of approach. And what was happening was you had artists at the time who couldn't afford spaces that were out there, that were taking over those run-down areas. The artists move in, they get things going. Quite often then what we saw was gentrification going on, and it became too expensive, the area, and the artists moved out. What you need, first of all, is a concentration of artists. And unfortunately, in North Kirklees and around Dewsbury, we don't have the concentration that's necessary for people to come in. Now, Peter has just offered us very kindly, what do we call it, a shop, a unit, whatever, that before that is developed, etc., has just said to us, is there anybody we know that just want to take that space over for a while? So I think we're starting to look at that approach, and I'm really grateful to Peter for offering that. But I also think the work that Creative Scene is doing in North Kirklees is helping to build much more of a critical mass of artists in the area that will be looking to do something.
Yeah, so Yeah, I mean, there's been some fantastic ideas, you know, aired in this room today, and you can see there's some real energy and some great projects, you know, that are underway. You know, I'm quite new to this myself, I have to be honest, and I don't really know North Kirklees that well either. I just wondered, actually, whether there might be some value, perhaps in terms of this committee and generally, to actually have some kind of paper or discussion about the barriers that actually exist to, you know, to getting some of these ideas, you know, actually, you know, kind of really spell them out, because obviously in a systematic way, and that might allow us to, you know, obviously develop our policies to overcome them. But also what would be quite interesting would be, again, maybe from a scrutiny process, because the thing about Kirklees, we all know it's a very diverse place, and, you know, there are loads of, well, there's just loads of Kirklees within Kirklees, isn't there? And so I suppose it would be interesting to actually, if in a paper like that, to actually compare, to see whether similar barriers are operating and similar opportunities, you know. I don't know, it's just a thought that has arisen from this discussion, because, I mean, we are going to be, you know, thinking about moving forward, how we're going to kind of develop this work. So, anyway.
Yeah, would there be any mileage if we're interested in partnerships and how those are developing and how those are working? I agree that looking at what's happening in Dewsbury, given the fact it's a little bit further forward in some ways, would it be worth a group looking at both issues? And perhaps, I think it'd be quite interesting to go and visit Dewsbury and look at some of these sites and talk to the people who are involved. Yeah, and we haven't done a visit, have we, this year? I think that would be useful. So, I don't know what you think about that suggestion. Yeah, and then we could try and fit that in and get a quick report back in before the end of this municipal year. I think the other thing to flag up is the fact that this work is now kind of gathering pace in Dewsbury. It was a suggestion for next year's committee that I think it's important that we come back and look at what's actually happening with both Huddersfield and Dewsbury, but particularly with Dewsbury, to see if these things are starting to make a difference. Does that sound sensible? Yeah. So at the end of the meeting, if people can indicate if they would like to get involved in those things, then we can sit down, come up with a term of reference, perhaps do that in conjunction with Darren Simon, so that we're doing something that's really useful and try and get on with that work. Right. Bill, I think it's something.
Yes, thank you. I will be very, very brief now. Just looking at the focus of Pioneer House on media, etc., I'm just wondering if there are any opportunities arising from the announcement that Channel 4 is moving to Leeds, because Dewsbury is very, very closely placed for Leeds.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, because also with these kind of media things, it's the supply chain, it's the cheap rents, you've got lower rates. Are there opportunities in a town that's 10 minutes away by train from the centre of Leeds?
Okay, I can respond on that as well. When the whole thing about Channel 4 first came up, Leeds City Region actually looked to being a Leeds City Region bid, and Channel 4 turned around and said, we don't want to deal with the City Region, we want to deal with the city. But what the rest of us did was we said, that's fine then, we're quite clear, Channel 4's quite clear, and it's interesting, Channel 4 didn't want to know about workspace, Channel 4 wanted to know what is the cultural offer within the city, because we can't attract the right people unless you have the right cultural offer there. But anyway, we sat back and we said, that's fine. If Leeds then gets it, we as the surrounding local authorities will start to look at those very issues around supply chain. And so I was at a meeting at Leeds City Region on Friday. We started to talk about this. We started to talk about working together and to look at what would be our specialisms within each of the areas. Not everybody going and competing, but saying, do you know what? what is Dewsbury going to be the hub of activity for? We don't know enough. The announcement was only last week. We've still got to do that planning, but be assured it is an issue that we're working with our partners with to explore.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. An intractable problem. I think that the work that's been done so far is superb, and I kind of wish it well for the future. I'm very cynical about the town centre, but I'm very impressed with what I've heard this morning.
Right, thank you. It's good to, I hope it's good to have some positive feedback. We will minute that, yeah. Okay, so many thanks to Simon, to Adele and to Peter for coming along today. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this agenda. It's something that I think is very close to all of our hearts. As citizens of Kirklees, we want it to be a successful and thriving place. So thanks very much. Thank you. Yeah. Right, just to tie other things up fairly quickly then. Right, so the next thing is looking at the work programme. So just one thing to mention there. We've been approached about the January meeting that it's proposed that the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy consultation comes to us for discussion on the 17th of January. And that's something that we did quite a lot of, I think it was quite important work on last year. I think we see it as something that is a really important issue. I know, Martin, you really championed that last year. What's going to happen is that will come to us in January for our comments. It will then go to Cabinet in February and will go to full council in March. So it's our opportunity to have some input into what's going to go forward to Cabinet. Everybody happy with that? Yes, Martin?
Thanks, Robbie. I'd marked that on the paper. The only concern I have with that is the protracted, if it finishes off in March or whatever. I think an update, cold weather comes at any time, but an update before the usual onset of winter would be very helpful, so we know if they've learned anything from last year and what homeless and rough sleepers provision is for this year for the cold weather.
Yeah, if you remember at the end of, it was really the end of the winter period, there was a new set of council guidelines, but there was also the report put together by that consortium of voluntary groups. So it would be quite interesting to, just a brief paper perhaps, to come to the next meeting, if we could try and secure that, so we can have a look at that. Perhaps a quick discussion, just so we are clear that the things that we thought were important are being followed up. Yeah, very, very good point. Okay, and then the final point, the date of the next meeting is the 12th of December, and we start at 10 o'clock. Judith, yeah?
Just to say, I'm doing that task group on the housing allocation. One thing I've asked for, and I don't know if the members would want to attend, is for the officers to go through actually applying for a council property online and to go through the whole application with us and what actually happens. So if we get a date, we could put it round to all members and they could come and have a look.
Right, so could you... Yeah, you're in the process of following that up, are you, with officers? Yeah. So when that... Right. So if you could let Carol know about that, then you can inform everybody else. It would be good for people to come along and have a look at that.
It probably will be a Monday morning, because that's when we're having our meetings, Monday mornings.
Yeah, and thanks very much for the work that you're doing on this issue with Councillor Armour. I think there's some quite important things there which do have a real impact in people in social housing within Kirklees. So thanks very much. Quite a long meeting today. Thanks very much for your patience sitting through things. Thanks for some excellent questions and good contributions. Thank you.